Hi, this is Arthur, and you're listening to Jaslin Kaur, who's running for New York City Council on Two Broads Talking Politics. Stay home and stay safe.
Hi, everyone. I am Kelly, and this is Two Broads Talking Politics. We've been on a little bit of a mini hiatus while work got in the way, but I'm thrilled to be back. And today I am talking to Jaslin Kaur, who is running for the New York City Council in District 23, which is in Queens. So hi, Jaslin.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I am excited to talk to you. So I think a lot of people after November 2020 were like, okay, we're done with elections. We can just take off for the next 4 years. But right. 2021, a big New York City election year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so District 23 is in Queens. And as I understand it, the incumbent is not running again. And this is a wide open primary.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's a flurry of candidates running for council seats that are newly vacated. So there's a really great opportunity for us to have a new council and a new mayor in 2021.
Yes, excellent. And the primary is in June, right?
Right. The big day is June 22nd.
All right. Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about you then. You are just turned 25 years old, so pretty young. I believe you'd be the youngest woman ever on the New York City Council if you're elected.
That's right.
So tell me a little bit about you, your background, and why you've decided to run for city council.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's really an honor to be running in the same community where I was born and raised, right? The same community that nurtured me. I want to help serve in the city council. And I think there's nothing more beautiful and nothing more, exciting about that opportunity. And so for me, you know, I'm the daughter of immigrants who came here from Punjab in India in the 80s and the 90s and settled here out in one of the most easternmost parts of Queens. We're right by that Long Island border. And, you know, growing up here, I went to all the public schools. I'm really happy to have seen this community grow and shape in a way that never made me feel like a fish out of water. This is about the third largest Asian immigrant population in the entire city. And we've grown to be a plurality of people of color, but we haven't really had the representation at the city level to reflect that change in demographic. And so, you know, for me, I got my start, I cut my teeth in a lot of organizing spaces. So I don't really have a political background. This would be my first foray into electoral politics. But I spent a lot of my time fighting Betsy DeVos under the Trump administration for a number of years, fighting Title IX in the Department of Education. So I worked with a group called Know Your Nine, where we actually worked with survivors of gender-based violence and queer and trans students who were facing being removed from school or having their right to an education taken away from them. And so that was an amalgamation of policy advocacy at the state and federal level about doing know your rights trainings with students so that they actually knew how to advocate for themselves and push against really awful school administrations and just help them organize their own schools towards something that's actually going to protect their civil rights. And that was really at the core of the work. So when, you know, that experience really taught me the value and power of what policy can do to shape and mold the lives of people who deserve the most kinds of dignified opportunities in life to begin with. And so, you know, with that start, that really shaped my own personal politic. But I think what really was the impetus behind actually running for office and, throwing my hat into the ring and saying, all right, let's go, was really around just being tired of waiting for our elected leadership to respond to crises that have been going on longer than some of us have been alive, right? For me as a 25-year-old, but I really think about the taxi medallion crisis in New York City as one of the really formative moments of my life. So back in 2014, the bubble burst, so to speak, right? Private medallion lenders were artificially inflating the values of these taxi medallions that were supposed to be worth like millions of dollars. But what happens after inflation? It's economic collapse and massive debt for working immigrant families. And that's what happened to my father. And that was 7 years ago. And we're still dealing with debt. We're still trying to hang on to our home. And that's the reality for a lot of working class immigrant families. So for us, it's not only just personal, it's about safeguarding the lives of people who might not have something to look forward to if we don't really address this COVID-19 pandemic and this economic collapse.
Yeah. So a lot of these problems had been going on for a long time. But New York City, of course, was hit very hard by the beginning of the pandemic and then continued to be hit. I live in Chicago, so I know very well what this has done to big cities.
Right.
There are going to be so many things that the city council and the mayor are going to need to deal with in the upcoming 4-year cycle. How do you decide what are the priorities? How do you figure out how to serve all of the constituents that are going to need really a lot of help?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really tough in New York City in particular because we've really been at the behest of the decisions of our governor. And I'm sure a lot of folks are hearing the buzz about Governor Cuomo and just how much he has deeply devastated this city and could have taken so many preventative measures to protect our workers and protect so many preventable deaths from actually happening. Like in my district, we actually have a senior home, Parker Jewish Institute, that is actually the site of the largest amount of COVID-19 deaths in a senior home in the entire city, 119. So, that just tells you just how much we've grossly mismanaged it. But because Governor Cuomo is trying to make all the decisions around vaccine distribution, around where the testing sites are going to be, the city is really just waiting for him to do the right thing. And I think that really just says a lot about how we're supposed to co-govern at every single level of government here. But at the end of the day, it's really troubling because we keep kicking the can down the road, right? If the city asks the state for money, the state will say, well, we're not getting federal aid, right? And so I think at some point we really need to double down and look at our budgets as moral documents and say that we need to fund the future for people who can't feed their families, who don't have health care and are probably at risk of losing their housing. If we don't solve the housing crisis in New York City, we could have the largest eviction and mortgage crisis and foreclosure crisis the city has ever seen. We're on a pathway to economic ruin. And, while the city's powers are a little bit limited in what we can do materially, we need our mayor to tax the rich, right? There's a package of bills that could generate over $50 billion in revenue. And it's on the table, right? We just need the moral and political will to sign these kinds of pieces of legislation that are going to win us a dignified life.
You mentioned that a lot of the seats on the council are vacant in this upcoming election cycle, and there could be, a huge new slate of city legislators. Are you talking to other people who are running in other districts in New York City? What would that look like if you can all get into office and can start to put some of these policies in place?
Yeah, so a number of us candidates are plotting and scheming. It's really exciting. And I think building out that candidate network, especially for a number of first-time candidates and women of color, it's been a really enriching experience to make it feel like you're not charting this path alone, right? There's a lot of deep solidarity that we're building with each other. And a fellow candidate, Felicia Singh, who is also, suffering under this taxi medallion crisis, we found a lot of sisterhood in trying to navigate this really awful pandemic and campaigning in the middle of a pandemic too, right? That alone is just so difficult. So for us, it's really exciting for us to not only just share this like emotional and spiritual bond with each other, but also really lock down, okay, how are we going to be champions with each other to really be those allies when it comes down to really passing important legislation. So lots of work behind the scenes that a lot of people don't get to see.
Yeah, I saw that Tiffany Caban is running in the 22nd. Yeah. She was on the podcast back when she was running for Queens DA, and so close to winning.
She's a homie. We never forget 2019.
Yeah. So you mentioned what it's like to be out campaigning in a pandemic. What does that look like? What are you able to do, and what aren't you able to do? What have you had to be creative about?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of creative liberty when you're in the middle of a pandemic. Like right now, I'm at my dining table. This is essentially the campaign office, and the trunk of my car holds a lot of our campaign material. So we don't get to have a campaign office, which is, what is really the center of what people think of when you're running a campaign. People all on the phones, people in their cubicles. We don't get to have that. We're on Zoom. And we ask people to show up, socially distanced for in-person things. Like just today we did had like 17 or so people show up for a field canvass where we spread out across the district to talk to our neighbors and talk to our voters on the streets by local businesses. So that's like one element. For the people who don't want to get out there and don't really want to be in the field, we do phone banking. So we call up our neighbors and actually have these conversations one-on-one. And what's been really enriching about this experience is that so many people have remarked that in this part of Queens, especially, they've never seen a candidate advocating for themselves or being in the streets themselves, or the candidate themselves making these phone calls, right? It's really easy to shift that work onto someone else that you can pay to do it for you. But that direct voter contact can happen in so many different ways. And I think that's what's the really creative element. We're not losing out on opportunities to talk to voters. Sure, it's a little bit harder, but we're still going to work to get people to learn about a campaign that's going to serve them at the end of the day.
How are people doing when you're out there talking to them? What are you hearing from neighbors, from people in your district?
Yeah, I mean, clearly this pandemic has just been so devastating for so many people. And we actually have one of the largest senior populations in our district in the entire city. Close to 20% of our district is senior. So we have a lot of people who, when you stop to talk to them, a few of them will just be like, okay, yeah, I'll take your card. Goodbye. Thanks for the information. But the more enriching conversations you have with people, they start to realize no one's really ever asked me about city council before. They don't even really know what a city council member does. So many times I've been on the phone trying to explain about development, about how we negotiate a budget. And that just shows what the gap in knowledge for so many people about what local leadership actually can achieve for all of us. But I think people are just really concerned about, how they're going to continue working and living and being able to afford this part of Queens. And I think that's one of just the most devastating things, that people who have lived here for generations, who have built up generations of family who call this place home, might not get to because, they could face foreclosure, they could face eviction, or, they're looking after the elderly, they're looking after their grandparents, hoping that maybe they can get a vaccination, or hoping that someone will take the actual material initiative to stop this pandemic. So you hear some heartbreaking stories really on the phones. And that is one of the hardest things to absorb when you don't have that face-to-face contact with somebody. But then there's those moments of joy. Like today we met a mother who told me about her daughter who's in 6th grade right now. And she's like, yeah, my daughter would love to volunteer. And I was like, are you kidding? It's yeah, she wants to go into politics just like you. And I think that also tells me just, what the duty of somebody who wants to change the shape of political leadership has to do, right? My job is to carve out a path so that the shoes that I want to walk in can be easier for someone else to walk in later down the road too.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure if my kids were in your district, they'd want to help too.
All hands on deck. We need everybody.
So education, of course, is one of the things that is a big issue for you, a big focus for you. And you talked about your work in organizing for education. Can you tell me a little bit about what that looks like in New York City right now, in your district, and what you hope that it could look like? I know this, among other things, the pandemic has really sort of highlighted some of the disparity in education and some of the problems that remain in our public school systems. So what can the city council do? What would you like the city council to be doing to really increase the educational opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, listen, New York City has one of the most segregated school systems in the entire country, but we're also so chronically underfunded. So the state government, there's a campaign for fiscal equity that's going on right now that is calling for us to close the over $4 billion gap in funding for all of our New York City public schools. And in my district, we're owed about $22 million to fully fund our schools, right? So already just in the funding gap, there's so much about inequities there. Even our PTAs are inequitably funded, right? So when you think about who gets to have the actual resources for arts and music programs, for after-school programs, these are the enriching things that help students see something beyond a K through 12 education, can dream higher and do things much greater than people might expect them to, especially for Black and Brown students who have an additional hurdle, right, to saying what they can achieve because of these systemic barriers. But I think, for me, when I think about the right to education, especially in this district, we have some of the best schools in the entire city. Like PS 115, where I went to for elementary school, is now Blue Ribbon School. And, that just tells me that if we're able to have this kind of impeccable education that so many great leaders come out of, we need to expand that for the rest of the city. And I think that comes down to the role of a council member, not just serving their own district, but thinking about the greater good of the entire city. We're looking out for a dignified life for every single person, no matter where they are. And I think if we're really thinking about transforming the pathways to education, that looks like fully funding our K through 12 system. It looks like fully funding CUNY schools, which predominantly serve Black and Brown students. I'm a CUNY grad myself and a community college grad too, and I left with zero debt. And that should be an opportunity for every single person.
Yeah, that would be excellent.
Would be nice. And cancel that student loan debt too. I hope Biden's listening.
I'm sure Biden's listening to our podcast. So New York City schools right now, are they in person? Are they some in person? Are they hybrid? What's going on there?
Yeah, great question. Teachers are just as confused as you and I are, right? And so are the parents. And I think that so many of the teachers have been left out of the decision making on when we actually plan to reopen schools. And we're seeing a parallel in how we're reopening indoor dining, right? These are some decisions that seem to be being made arbitrarily. So right before Valentine's Day, we opened up restaurants at 25% capacity. And now in the next few days, it'll be 35%. We don't know what that data is based on, right? COVID-19 rates are still increasing. And so for a lot of students, we're seeing parents who are being really burdened because they're trying to work from home at the same time they're trying to take care of their kids. Kids here didn't even get snow days because digital learning is now perpetual, right? You don't get a break. You're considered able to work whenever.
Yes, my kids are not very happy about that either.
Right. These are one of the fundamental, things about childhood. You get to stay home on a snow day. And so because of this vast mix of which schools are open for in-person, which one are remote, which ones are hybrid, it makes the COVID-19 situation even worse, right? Because there are students who come from different zip codes where the COVID-19 positivity rate is even higher, but it's based on the actual school zoning, right? So it makes for an immense amount of confusion on just how safe is it to send kids to schools, especially if they don't have proper ventilation, right? There's so many schools in New York where the windows don't even open. So it's not going to be safe until we actually address these structural systemic problems too.
So if people are listening and thinking, I really like this, Jaslin, I want to help out, how can they help your campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always room for somebody, right? I always say that there's multiple roads that lead to the same town square, and we're trying to cross that finish line in June 22nd. So whether you're in New York City and in our district, we'd love to have you in the field, right? We're always talking to our voters every single week. But you can also hop on Zoom with us and call up our voters. You can check out our website at jaslinkaur.nyc and sign up for a shift. You never know, right? If you've got an hour or two to knock out and you're not doing anything, call up our voters because you're calling up people who are my neighbors who I grew up with too. So if you want to throw down, we always have an opportunity for you to do something, or you can volunteer, right? We're always looking for creative minds, whether you're in a social media kind of sector, if you're someone who's really passionate about a certain sector of policy, everyone has something to contribute to our campaign. And we're really looking to build up those skills for people. So we're always happy to have you.
And then someday when you're president, we can say, we helped your first campaign.
You got to remember everybody that builds out that pathway. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Is there anything else that you wanted to make sure we talk about today?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, as a young woman of color, there's so much history to make in this cycle alone, right? We have never elected a South Asian person to city council ever. And we have some of the densest South Asian populations in the entire country right here in New York City. And my district has never had anybody but white men represented too. So we need leadership that reflects those changes, right? But we also need to chart a path to make sure that we're the voice of the people who have really never been talked to about our local politics. We've never really gotten a phone call from an elected official to tell them about what do you think, right? And that's actually asking them for their input. So for me, for young women of color, we're put under a different kind of scrutiny, right? A laser sharp focus of scrutiny. But I think if I'm able to chart a path for somebody else to say, you ran and win, so I can do it too, I think that makes it even more worthwhile.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. I'm really excited about your campaign and excited about all the changes that can come to city governments. I think it's sort of the overlooked piece of government and is so, so important.
Right.
So I'll put links to your website and your social media up on our website so people can find those and can help you out. And then we'll all be watching with fingers crossed in June.
We're all biting our nails till that day.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.